All right, hello everyone. Today is seventh grade science. My name is Mr. Sheridan. Today is September 1st, and here's your instructional video for today. What we are going to do is build upon what we did yesterday. So yesterday I asked you to look around your house and find 5 things that you could either group into categories or somehow create a graph on. And what we're going to do today is we're going to find one of those things and we're going to actually make the perfect graph. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about what goes into making a really good graph. And then I'm going to have you take one of the things that you did yesterday and apply that to what you've learned. So I'm going to share my screen with you very quickly once we get on the right page here so that you all can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Here we go. So the first thing that we need to realize is that there are many types of graphs. Okay, so the most common that you would use for an assignment like this is a bar graph. Okay, where you're taking different categories of things and you're putting them in a row so that you can chart how many of each object or how many things fit into each category. When you're categorizing things, we're going to use bar graphs. But there's lots of different types of graphs. So let's focus on a few of them. So we just talked about bar graphs. And you'll figure out that this graph that is on your screen right now is not actually perfect. There are some things missing, but the idea here is that we have a title at the top and we are categorizing different things and we're recording how many of each category we have. Okay, so that's bar graphs. We put them into specific categories. This is a pie chart or a circle graph, whichever you'd like. Works really, really, really well with percentages. So you can see how much of the entire pie that particular option has. So for instance, for this particular example, we have obviously the most students take the bus, 40% of them. So when you're dealing with percentages, when you're dealing with a part of a whole, the pie chart is the best way to go. Scatter plots is another example of a graph that we can that does a really good job of giving us a big picture example of what it is that we're looking for. So here on our x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, we have the elevation in miles. So those each one of those numbers goes up by exactly the same amount. So we go from 500 to 1,000 to 1,500 to 2,000. And then on the y-axis, which is vertical, we're talking about the mean annual temperature. Okay, so this is how hot or cold it is based on degrees Celsius. So we can see kind of how the temperature goes down as the elevation goes up. So this shows us a good example of when we have the relationship between two different things, when we have a lot of data. Scatter plot does a really nice job of that. Here is another example of a scatter plot. These are Old Faithful eruptions that show how long those eruptions last. And if you look at the y-axis, it is the waiting time between the eruptions. So a couple of different things, and we have lots of different data, and we want to compare two different things. A scatter plot is a really good tool to use that for. Line graphs work really, really well for showing how one thing changes over time. So if we're talking about things like music, when the actual pitch changes over a number of different over time, we can see that. If the vibrations change, these line graphs are used a lot for recording things related to earthquakes, when we can a seismograph, when we can actually see that the vibrations tend to increase over time, and we can see the relation of how that works. Another example of a line graph is showing the relationship over time. So when you have something that is changing consistently, and usually that's time, we're going to try to use a line graph, okay? So this particular example is the global temperature over time. So you can see it starts at 1800 and goes all the way to 2000, and you can see how that global temperature changes over time. So as one variable changes consistently, we can see how it changes over time. Okay, so these are the rules, folks. And here at the bottom, there is an acronym that you need to know. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to go and to go back and watch this instructional video, and I want you to pause on this particular slide and make sure that you know this. This is how we create a really good graph. Okay, first of all, you need to pick the correct type of graph. So if we are grouping things together that are in our house, we're going to use a bar graph. If we're measuring something over time, we're going to use a line graph. So first of all, we need to use the correct graph to tell the story of whatever data it is that we have collected. Then you need to draw your axis, both your X, which is your horizontal axis, and your Y axis, which is your vertical axis. Then you need to decide what the best intervals are. If your set of data goes from 0 to 1000 and you choose to use intervals from 0 to 330 million, that's not going to really show up on your graph. So you need to pick an interval that makes sense for your data set. Then you need to make sure that your axis has consistent increments. So you can't go from 5 to 10 to 25 to 75 to 150. You've got to go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. You've got to keep those increments completely level. They have to be the same. And it's really important that they do. Okay, then you're going to plot your points. Make sure that all of your data points, so if you go down your x-axis, you find the correct point, you go up the y, and you find that point, you're going to make a dot on your slide. So if you're making on your graph. So if you're making a bar graph, you're going to find the category on your x-axis. So yesterday we used the example of writing utensils in the junk drawer. So if you go over to Sharpies, then you see how many Sharpies you have. So you're going to go up to 7 or whatever it is. You're going to make that line, and then you're going to create your bar graph. So make sure you plot your points. Then you're going to label the axis, and you need to include the units. So for example, that we just talked about, what types of writing utensils do you have in your junk drawer? On the bottom, you're going to say utensils or writing utensils. And then on the other side, you're going to say number of writing utensils or whatever it is. Those are going to be your you don't have to put units for those because you're just counting exactly how many there are. But for instance, if you were measuring, I'm trying to think of a good example of something that has either, if you're using centimeters to measure something, if you're saying that, okay, so over time you traveled this far. So if you're using distance as your y-axis and time as your x-axis. So down below, you're going to label time, but what's the unit? Meaning, is it in minutes? Is it in seconds? Is it in hours or days or years or whatever that unit is? Make sure that you label that unit. Now on your y-axis, you need to make sure that you also do the same thing. So if you're using distance over there on your y-axis, is it in centimeters? Is it in meters? Is it in feet, yards, miles, kilometers? Whatever it is, you need to make sure that you include those units. Now, if you choose to do a bar graph, and instead of actually labeling each individual thing on your x-axis, you want to use colors, you can do that, but you need to include a key so that we know what color indicates which utensil in that example that we talked about. You need a title at the top, and all of those things go into this acronym that we use, which is called Talk It Up. Talk it up. So those are the things that you need to remember. So I encourage you to go back, watch this slide deck again in the instructional video, and pause on this slide so that you can see this, write it down, make sure that you know this. You will need to know how to make a graph, and each graph needs to include every point from Talk It Up. So with that, if we get out of this and go to our classroom, and we click on classwork and go all the way down to the bottom of the page, today's assignment will be posted down here as soon as our video is posted. And your assignment for today is to create one perfect graph that uses every aspect of Talk It Up. Okay? If you have any questions, as always, please email me, shoot me a note, let me know what I can do to help, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great day.